You're driving home after dinner or a long day when your rearview mirror suddenly fills with red and blue lights. Gasps. Your stomach drops. You glance at your speed. You mentally replay the last mile. Was that turn too fast? Did you miss a signal? You ease over to the shoulder, hands a little tight on the wheel, trying to stay calm. The officer walks up, calm but firm. You exchange the basics. Then comes the question that instantly changes the feel of the stop. Any weapons in the vehicle? Surprised. It sounds simple, almost casual, but it's not small talk. It's a pivot point, because if you answer the way most people do, open, honest, trying to be helpful, you may have just handed the officer legal and psychological leverage that turns a routine stop into something much bigger. The moment a firearm enters the conversation, the tone can shift. You might be asked to step out. You might be separated from your car. Your weapon might be secured. What started as a minor traffic issue can suddenly feel like an investigation. Here's what most people don't understand. The danger usually isn't being a lawful gun owner. The danger is saying the wrong thing, at the wrong time, in the wrong state, without understanding how your answer can widen the officer's options. There is one calm, clear sentence that can protect your rights without making you look paranoid or hostile. But whether you say it, and when you say it, depends completely on where you are and what your legal obligations are there. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to handle that moment so you don't accidentally talk yourself into a search, an extended stop, or worse. Hi, I'm Artur, and here on Us Movin' Money, I break down real-world legal encounters so you know how to protect yourself calmly, confidently, and intelligently. This isn't about being anti-police, and it's not about being reckless with your rights. It's about understanding how roadside encounters actually work, psychologically and legally, so you don't make a permanent mistake in a temporary situation. If you're a lawful gun owner, or even if you're not but just want to understand your rights during a traffic stop, what we're about to go through can help you avoid unnecessary escalation. We'll talk about when you must disclose a firearm, when you don't, why that any weapons question matters so much, and the exact phrases that protect you without needlessly raising tension. Because the side of the road is not where you win arguments. It's where you avoid extra charges. And once you understand the structure behind that single question, you'll never hear it the same way again. Before we even get to firearms, we need to fix something that causes more trouble than almost anything else during a stop: confusion about what you actually owe the officer. When you're lawfully pulled over, you are generally required to provide your driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance if requested. That's not optional. That's not a constitutional debate. That's the legal baseline. This is where some people derail the encounter immediately by trying to argue roadside constitutional theory. You've probably heard people say things like, "I'm not engaged in commerce," or "I'm traveling, not driving," or "I have a right to travel, so I don't need a license." Let's clear that up. The constitutional right to travel is about moving freely between states and being treated equally under the law. It is not a trick that lets you drive a car without complying with licensing laws. Trying to argue that on the shoulder of a highway doesn't make you look informed. It makes you look obstructive. And that's how a simple traffic stop turns into refusal to identify, obstruction, or worse. The roadside is not a courtroom and not a debate stage. It's a controlled environment where the officer has legal authority over the stop. Your goal there is simple: comply physically, protect yourself verbally. That means hand over the required documents. Keep your movements slow and easy to see. If it's dark, turn on your interior light. Keep your hands on the wheel. If your registration is in the glove box, say clearly, "My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed?" And wait for instructions before you move. Narrating your movements does two things. It keeps the encounter calm, and it makes it very hard for anyone later to claim you were making suspicious motions. Calm, visible, predictable, that's the mindset. Because once the basics are out of the way, that's when the stop either stays routine or turns into something more. And that turn often starts with one line. Any weapons in the vehicle? Here's what most people don't realize. The legally safe way to answer that question depends on geography. In the United States, firearm disclosure laws generally fall into three broad categories. If you carry, you should know which category your state falls into long before you see flashing lights. First, duty to inform states. In these states, if you're carrying a firearm, especially under a permit, you are legally required to inform the officer during a lawful stop. That disclosure is part of the legal framework of carrying there. Second, inform if asked states. Here, you may not have to volunteer anything up front, but if the officer directly asks whether you have a weapon, you may be legally obligated to answer truthfully. Third, no duty to disclose states. In these jurisdictions, unless some separate law or situation applies, you are not required to tell the officer that you're carrying. Now, here's the part that matters more than people think. Even in a no duty to disclose state, the moment the officer becomes aware that a firearm is present, the nature of the stop often changes. Not because you've broken a law, but because of human psychology and police training. From the officer's perspective, they're standing inches from an unknown person who has access, actual or potential, to a deadly weapon. Even if you're calm, polite, and fully lawful, the equation in their mind changes immediately. Unknown person plus firearm equals elevated caution. That elevated caution triggers training. Training triggers procedures, and procedure is usually about control. Control can look like being asked to step out of the car. It can mean being told to keep your hands higher or more visible. It can mean the officer telling you they're going to temporarily secure your firearm for safety. None of that automatically means you're in legal trouble, but it does mean the encounter has escalated beyond a basic speeding chat. Legally, this is important because when officer safety enters the picture, the legal toolbox expands. During a lawful traffic stop, officers already have the authority to order a driver out of the vehicle. If they reasonably believe someone may be armed and dangerous, they can conduct a limited pat-down for weapons. They may do a quick protective sweep of areas within immediate reach if they can articulate a specific safety concern. That word, articulate, is critical. Later, in reports or in court, everything comes down to how they describe what happened. The driver appeared very nervous. The driver was unusually calm. It was a high-crime area. The driver avoided eye contact. The driver made movements toward the center console. Some of those sound contradictory, and sometimes they are. But in legal analysis, a collection of small, seemingly innocent details can be stacked under training and experience to justify further investigation. That's why your words matter. Every extra detail you offer can become one more brick in a narrative you didn't intend to help build. And this is where most vehicle searches actually begin, not with dramatic probable cause, but with conversation. There are two main pathways from a routine stop to a car search: your consent, or the officer building enough reasonable suspicion to extend the stop. Consent is by far the most common. It doesn't require probable cause. It just requires you to say yes, or to say something that can be treated as yes. Officers are trained in how to ask. You might hear, "You don't mind if I take a quick look, right?" Or, "If you've got nothing to hide, this shouldn't be a problem." That framing is powerful because it quietly shifts the burden onto you to prove you're innocent. Most people want to appear cooperative. They want to show they're the good guy. They don't want to seem difficult or defensive. So they talk, they explain, they reassure, and in doing so, they often give either clear consent or enough verbal wiggle room for the officer to treat it as consent. Here's the hard truth. You don't usually talk your way out of a search. You talk your way into one. The more you explain, the more angles exist for follow-up questions. More questions means more chances for small inconsistencies, real or perceived. And once those inconsistencies appear, reasonable suspicion starts to form. If this is already changing the way you think about traffic stops, that's the whole point. Most people only learn this after something goes wrong. Now let's get practical, because this is where people either protect themselves or accidentally open the door. Once you've given your license, registration, and insurance, and you've complied with any disclosure law in your state, the stop often shifts into a more conversational tone. It might sound casual, it might even feel friendly. But many of the next questions are not about curiosity. They're about building a record. Where are you coming from tonight? Sounds harmless, feels harmless, but it's not really about geography. It's about consistency. If your answer shifts later, even slightly, it becomes a point to note. If you hesitate, that's a note. If your passenger gives a slightly different story, that's a note. So what do you say? Calmly and respectfully, I plead the fifth. You say it evenly, not sarcastic, not dramatic, just steady. Some people worry that invoking the Fifth Amendment sounds aggressive or guilty. It isn't. It's a constitutional protection. And the officer who gets irritated by you calmly asserting a constitutional right is exactly the kind of officer you need that protection with. You're not refusing to show ID. You're not resisting. You're just declining to answer investigative questions. Then comes the sharper version. Is there anything illegal in the car? This is a dangerous question because it pushes you to be absolutely certain in a world where certainty is risky. You may think you know exactly what's inside your car, but you cannot control everything that's ever been in it. A friend could have left something behind. Something might have slipped between the seats months ago. Trash could have been tossed inside in a parking lot. If you answer, no, there's absolutely nothing illegal in here, and they later find something, even small, now you're accused of lying. Instead, your answer is the same. I plead the fifth. Same calm tone, same short delivery. The power here is consistency. You're not arguing. You're not being dramatic. You're simply declining to create statements that could be used against you later. Now, the most manipulative phrasing, you wouldn't mind if I take a look, right? This question is built so that either yes or no can be twisted. If you say, no, I don't mind, that can sound like permission. If you say yes, that can sound like agreement. So you don't answer it on those terms. You respond with clarity. I do not consent to any searches. That sentence is clean. It's unambiguous. It's body cam proof. It doesn't insult the officer, and it doesn't accuse them of anything. It just sets a boundary. Once you've said it, you don't need to explain. If they ask, why not? Or, if you've got nothing to hide, why do you care? You simply repeat, I do not consent to any searches. Broken record, calm tone. Another common escalation tool is the canine reference. I'll just call a dog. Here's what you need to know. Officers generally cannot legally prolong a traffic stop that's already completed just to wait for a canine unit without separate reasonable suspicion. So how do they often build that suspicion? Through your words, your visible nervousness, your shifting explanations. Mentioning a dog is sometimes used as psychological pressure. Many people decide it's easier to say, fine, go ahead and search, just to get it over with. But that's a trade. Short-term convenience for long-term vulnerability. Your response still doesn't change. I do not consent to any searches. That's it. You don't try to argue canine case law on the side of the road. You don't argue how long they can detain you. You calmly preserve your position and let any legal challenge happen later with a lawyer in the right setting. Then there's attitude bait. A raised voice, a sarcastic comment, a dismissive tone. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's just personality. But the effect can be the same, to push you into an emotional reaction. Emotional drivers talk more. They move more. They say things like, I don't care, do whatever you want. Those statements are gold in a report. Your advantage is composure, polite, calm, short, consistent. I plead the fifth. I do not consent to any searches. That's your toolkit. So let's condense all of this into a mental roadside handbook, whether you're carrying or not, if you want maximum protection. First, know which legal category your state falls into. Duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. That decides your first move when you hear, "Any weapons in the vehicle?" Second, when the officer approaches, keep your hands visible, preferably on the steering wheel. If it's dark, turn on your interior light. Third, narrate your movements before you reach anywhere. My registration is in the glove box. How would you like me to proceed? Fourth, if you're legally required to disclose a firearm, do it calmly and clearly, then stop talking. Don't volunteer extra information. Fifth, if you're asked for consent to search, I do not consent to any searches. Sixth, for investigative questions unrelated to basic identification and the reason for the stop, I plead the fifth. Finally, if the stop starts dragging on and no longer feels tied to the original reason, you can ask two simple questions. Am I being detained? And am I free to go? Those force clarity. If you're free to go, leave calmly. If you're being detained, stay calm and continue asserting your rights verbally, not physically. If you know someone who carries, or someone who thinks politeness alone will protect them, share this with them. Most people don't learn these distinctions until after a mistake they didn't need to make. Now we need to talk about the most serious moment in this entire interaction, the moment when a firearm is physically involved. Everything so far has been about protecting your legal position. What comes next is about protecting your life. If you're carrying and the officer decides they want to secure the firearm, for safety, your ego, your pride, and your political views cannot be part of the equation. This is about survival. Never handle a firearm in the presence of an officer during a stop. Ever. Not to be helpful. Not because they say, "Just hand it to me." Not because you think you can do it safely. From their perspective, the second your hand moves toward a weapon, everything becomes a split-second threat assessment. Adrenaline is high. Reaction times are compressed. Misinterpretations happen in fractions of a second. And when a firearm is in motion, the legal standard almost always favors the officer under the doctrine of officer safety. If something goes wrong in that moment, you do not get the benefit of the doubt. So here's how to handle it correctly. If you're required to disclose and you've told the officer you're carrying, and they ask where the firearm is, tell them clearly and specifically without moving your hands toward it. It's on my right hip. It's in the center console. It's in the glove compartment. Keep your hands visible the entire time. If they say, "Hand it to me," your response should be calm and steady. "Officer, I'm not comfortable touching the firearm in your presence. I'll keep my hands visible. You're welcome to secure it." That sentence does three things. It shows cooperation, it avoids sudden movement, and it puts control of the weapon in the officer's hands in a way that matches their training. Hands visible, fingers spread if needed. No sudden gestures. Let them retrieve it. Don't over-narrate, don't reach to help. In this moment, doing less is doing more. And you need to understand this clearly. The roadside is not where constitutional battles are won. It is where misunderstandings escalate fast. If the officer mishandles your firearm, scratches it, unloads it poorly, that is a problem for later, through the proper channels. It is not a reason to start physically intervening while the stop is happening. The second you start physically resisting how an officer is handling a weapon during a stop, you've turned a verbal situation into a physical one. That shift is dangerous. Now, zooming out, let's talk about what not to do overall. Don't try to be funny. Joking your way out of a ticket is a gamble, not a strategy. Humor depends on shared perception, and under stress, you don't control how your tone lands. Don't try to impress the officer with how much law you know. There's no prize for proving you've watched 100 legal videos. It usually just irritates someone who has a lot of discretion over how the next 20 minutes go. Don't escalate your volume. If the officer gets louder, you get quieter. If they speed up, you slow down. That emotional contrast helps you later if anything is reviewed. Calm tends to look credible. Chaos tends to look suspicious. Don't overshare to seem transparent. Transparency without strategy is exposure. If you're not legally required to disclose a firearm in your state, choosing not to talk about it is not lying. Lawful silence is not deception. It's a right. And finally, don't physically resist while verbally asserting your rights. That combination destroys your position. The formula is simple. Comply physically. Assert your rights verbally. Over and over. Strip away the politics, the emotions, the internet debates, and you're left with a simple objective. Get through the encounter safely. Protect your legal position, and avoid giving away leverage you don't have to give. Before we wrap up, there's one more layer that matters more than any individual sentence: personal responsibility. Laws vary from state to state. They vary by permit status. They change over time. A strategy that protects you in one jurisdiction might cause problems in another if you don't understand the disclosure rules where you are. That means it's your responsibility to know which category your state is in: duty to inform if asked, or no duty to disclose. It also means recognizing that what you're hearing is education, not personalized legal advice. If you carry regularly, you should know a qualified attorney in your state before you ever need one, not after something has already gone wrong. The worst time to start researching your rights is when you're already in handcuffs or watching your car being searched. Preparation is quiet. It happens long before the flashing lights. So let's bring this back to the beginning. You're driving. The lights appear behind you. You pull over safely. Interior light on. Hands visible. Breathing under control. The officer approaches. You provide your license, registration, and proof of insurance. You comply with whatever your state legally requires regarding firearm disclosure. Then comes the question: any weapons in the vehicle? This time, you don't panic. You don't overshare. You don't try to prove you're one of the good ones. You answer according to your actual legal obligation. Nothing more, nothing less. If further investigative questions start, you respond calmly. I plead the fifth. If consent to search is requested, I do not consent to any searches. If the firearm needs to be secured, I'm not comfortable touching it. You're welcome to secure it. Hands visible. Movements slow. Tone even. Notice what's missing in that version of the story. No arguing, no sarcasm, no emotional spikes, no unnecessary details. You're boring, predictable, controlled, and that is exactly what protects you. Because the side of the road is not where you win your case. It's where you avoid building one against yourself. Every extra sentence is a potential brick. Every unnecessary explanation is a potential extension of the stop. Used correctly, silence is not suspicious. It is strategic. So here's the mindset shift I want you to carry from now on. You do not owe roadside conversation beyond what the law requires. You do not have to perform cooperation. You do not have to convince anyone of your innocence. Your job is simple: comply physically, assert your rights verbally, and survive the encounter safely. If you remember nothing else, remember this: calm voice, clear boundaries, consistent phrases. And when it comes to investigative questions that go beyond the reason for the stop, use your constitutional protection without apology. Because at the end of the day, rights only protect the people who use them. And when that question comes, you'll know exactly what to do and exactly what not to say.